The fluorescent lights of Sterling Corp hummed a dull, monotonous song, a soundtrack to 1,000 soul-crushing spreadsheets and lukewarm coffees. For Leo, an IT analyst who'd spent 6 years ensuring the digital plumbing of his department ran smoother than a freshly oiled server rack, it was a familiar, if uninspiring, symphony. He wasn't the guy making splashy presentations or schmoozing with VPs over overpriced lattes. Leo was the quiet architect of efficiency, the one who saw the potential for 1,000 hours saved in a single well-written line of code. His domain was the intricate dance of data, the seamless flow of information, the unseen infrastructure that kept Sterling Corp from dissolving into a digital swamp of its own making. He developed scripts, small digital elves, to automate the mundane, to free up his team from the drudgery that ate away at their creativity and morale. He didn't boast about it. It wasn't in his nature. His reward was seeing the work get done, seeing his colleagues breathe a little easier. He was, in essence, the invisible backbone. Then Greg arrived. Greg wasn't just new management, he was an invasion, a walking, talking embodiment of every corporate buzzword bingo card ever created. He strode into the office like he owned it, which, given his inflated sense of self-importance, was probably the next best thing. His suits were sharp, his tie knots were impeccably precise, and his smile was as genuine as a $3 bill. He spoke in a language of synergy, leveraging core competencies and optimizing bandwidth, none of which seemed to translate into any tangible improvement in the actual work. He didn't understand systems, he understood optics. He didn't want to build, he wanted to appear to be building. Leo watched with a familiar sense of unease as Greg began his reign of terror. It started subtly, like a slow leak under the sink. Greg would call team meetings not to collaborate, but to dictate. He'd pepper Leo's already concise instructions with contradictory directives, then later claim Leo had misunderstood. "Leo, I need this report by end of day," Greg would say, his voice dripping with manufactured urgency. Then, an hour later, "Leo, I've been thinking maybe we should pivot on that. Let's put a pin in it and focus on the Q3 projections. Really double down on the strategic alignment." Leo, ever the professional, would nod, take notes, and meticulously update his documentation. His digital journal became a fortress of facts. Every email, every instant message, every whispered instruction in the hallway was logged, time-stamped, and saved. He started to notice a pattern, a particularly insidious one. Greg's strategic alignments always seemed to involve undermining Leo's authority and making his team look less competent. It was as if Leo's efficiency was a personal affront to Greg's carefully constructed image of leadership. "We need to be more agile, Leo," Greg would say, pacing Leo's small cubicle like a caged tiger. "This isn't about brute force. It's about smart, nimble execution. I want to see innovation, fresh thinking." Leo, who had already spent weeks developing a script that could automate 80% of the team's data reconciliation, would simply nod. "Of course, Greg, we're all focused on innovation." He'd then discreetly save the latest version of his nimble execution script, adding a new feature that logged Greg's contradictory statements verbatim, cross-referenced with the original instruction. It was becoming less about IT analysis and more about building a case. A very, very digital case. The pressure mounted. Greg's micromanagement became suffocating. He'd ask for status updates on tasks Leo had literally just completed 5 minutes prior. He'd question every decision, dissect every line of code Leo presented, even though Greg's technical understanding barely extended to rebooting his own laptop. Leo's team, once a cohesive unit, started to feel the strain. Morale dipped like a poorly optimized stock price. Whispers of, "What's the point?" And "he just doesn't get it" started to echo through the open plan office. Then came the email, a generic, soul-crushing corporate death knell. Subject, Talent Alignment Strategy, Phase 1. It was a Tuesday, 4:58 p.m. Just as Leo was about to pack up and head home, his fingers still stained with the phantom ink of code. The email, from Greg's freshly minted HR liaison, a woman named Brenda who communicated exclusively in passive-aggressive emojis, invited Leo to a brief informational meeting with Greg and herself the following morning at 8 a.m. No context, no warning, just a cold, digital summons. Leo's stomach, which had been churning with low-grade anxiety for weeks, tightened into a knot. He knew what this was. This was the prelude to the purge. This was the corporate equivalent of a dimly lit room with a single, uncomfortable chair. He'd seen it before, heard the hushed whispers of colleagues who'd been restructured or made redundant. He'd even helped some of them pack their boxes. But this time, it was him. He didn't sleep well that night. Not out of fear, exactly. More out of a grim sort of anticipation. He'd spent years building systems, fixing problems, making things run, and now his own career seemed to be the ultimate it problem, one he was determined to solve with the same meticulous logic he applied to every server crash and network outage. He'd been building something not just for Sterling Corp, but for himself, a safety net woven from meticulous documentation and a deep understanding of the very systems that were about to be used against him. The next morning, Leo arrived precisely at 7:58 a.m., 2 minutes early, as was his habit. He wore his standard work attire, a comfortable, well-worn button-down shirt and slacks, no power suit, no flashy tie, just the quiet competence of a man who knew his worth, even if his employer seemed determined to ignore it. He walked into conference room B, a sterile box of beige and gray, where Greg and Brenda were already seated. Greg was fiddling with a sleek tablet, his brow furrowed in an expression that was probably meant to convey gravitas, but looked more like he was struggling with a particularly stubborn pop-up ad. Brenda offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind you see on flight attendants when the plane is about to plummet. "Leo, thanks for coming in," Greg began, his voice smooth, practiced. "We've been doing a lot of strategic thinking about the department's future, about where we need to be to achieve optimal outcomes." Leo nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand, Greg." And Greg continued gesturing with his tablet. "As part of this strategic realignment, we've identified some areas where we believe we can create greater efficiencies. Some roles are becoming redundant. The word hung in the air, heavy and cold. And unfortunately, Leo, your role has been identified as such." Brenda slid a thick manila envelope across the polished surface of the table. It landed with a soft thud, the sound of a career ending. "This package contains all the details regarding your severance, benefits, and the terms of your separation agreement," she said, her voice devoid of empathy. "There's also a standard non-disclosure agreement." Leo didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He didn't betray any of the simmering anger or disappointment that was roiling beneath his calm exterior. He simply looked at the envelope, then back at Greg and Brenda. He remembered the countless hours he'd spent fixing Sterling Corp's digital messes, the times he'd stayed late to prevent critical system failures, the unsolicited improvements he'd made that saved the company thousands. He remembered the contemptuous way Greg had dismissed his suggestions, the way HR had ignored his subtle attempts to highlight the team's workload. "Redundant," Leo repeated, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "And unproductive?" Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Leo, it's not personal. It's just the metrics. Your contributions haven't been as impactful as we need them to be in this new direction." Leo's mind raced, not with panic, but with strategy. He saw the pieces clicking into place. Greg's contradictory instructions, Brenda's dismissive HR, the redundancy and lack of productivity claims. He pulled out his own small leather-bound notebook, a gift from his team years ago, and a pen. He didn't take notes on the severance package. He started jotting down the exact phrasing Greg had used, the specific reasons cited. He added a timestamp. "I see," Leo said, his voice measured. "So, to be perfectly clear, the company is terminating my employment due to redundancy and a perceived lack of productivity, despite my efforts to streamline processes and improve departmental efficiency." Brenda nodded briskly. "That's correct, Leo." Greg added, "We appreciate your service, Leo. We really do. But this is about the future of the company." Leo looked from Greg's smarmy smile to Brenda's practiced neutrality. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The calm of a programmer who has just discovered a critical bug and knows exactly how to fix it, even if the original author is oblivious. "Understood," Leo said, finally reaching for the envelope. He didn't open it. He just held it like a prop in a play that was far from over. "So, I'll need to return all company property, I presume?" "Yes, please," Brenda said, her gaze flicking towards the exit. "Your laptop, your badge, any company-issued equipment." Leo nodded. He slid the envelope into his briefcase, next to his meticulously organized personal documentation. He stood up, his movements fluid and deliberate. "Thank you for your time." He walked out of conference room B, leaving Greg and Brenda in their sterile little bubble of corporate delusion. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to follow him, but it no longer sounded like a dirge. It sounded, for the first time in a long time, like a prelude. As he walked through the office, he saw familiar faces, colleagues who had benefited from his scripts, who had shared late-night pizza with him during server crises. Some offered sympathetic glances, others quickly looked away, afraid of being associated with the redundant employee. Leo offered a small, almost imperceptible nod to a few. He knew they'd understand. Stepping out into the bright, unforgiving sunlight of the Sterling Corp parking lot, Leo didn't feel defeated. He felt liberated and incredibly powerfully prepared. He looked back at the gleaming glass facade of the building, a monument to corporate ambition and, as of today, profound oversight. They thought they were firing an IT analyst. They had no idea they had just fired the architect of their own undoing. He opened his car door, the familiar squeak, a comforting sound, and sat down. He didn't pull out his phone to vent. He didn't call a friend to cry. Instead, he opened his briefcase, unzipped a hidden compartment, and pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive. The engine of his car turned over, a quiet roar of defiance. He had a few trusted colleagues to notify, a carefully curated report to compile, and a company leadership that was about to learn a very hard lesson about the value of the people they so easily dismissed. The game, as they say, was afoot, and Leo, the quiet analyst, had just made his opening move. The sterile air of Leo's small apartment felt like a sanctuary after the corporate battleground of Sterling Corp. The manila envelope from HR lay unopened on his desk, a mocking testament to their simplistic view of his departure. He hadn't bothered to open it. What was inside was irrelevant now. The real contents of his departure were carefully organized in digital folders, encrypted and mirrored across 3 secure cloud services. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a meticulously planned operation, executed with the precision of a seasoned cybersecurity analyst. His fingers danced across the keyboard, the familiar glow of the monitor reflecting in his calm eyes. He had spent years documenting Greg's every contradictory directive, Brenda's passive-aggressive HR speak, and the company's increasingly lax adherence to its own protocols. He'd captured screenshots of project management software where Greg had moved deadlines with no explanation, logged every email that contradicted previous instructions, and even recorded snippets of overheard conversations, carefully time-stamped and anonymized where necessary. His personal backup of Sterling Corp's internal communication logs, an unintended consequence of his own proactive system monitoring, was now his most potent weapon. It wasn't illegal. It was simply data he'd accumulated as part of his job. Data Greg and Brenda had been too myopic to realize he was preserving. He initiated the first phase of his counteroffensive. A simple email, innocuous on its surface, was sent to a select group of trusted colleagues. The ones he knew were as frustrated by Greg's leadership as he was, but lacked the documentation or the nerve to act. The subject line was bland. Workflow optimization notes. The body contained a meticulously crafted document presented as helpful tips for navigating Greg's often nonsensical directives. Hidden within the formatting, however, were subtle nods, coded phrases that only those who had suffered under Greg's reign would understand. More importantly, attached was a compressed archive. It contained a streamlined version of his most impactful scripts, the ones that automated tedious data reconciliation and report generation. Not the full suite, of course, but enough to significantly ease the burden, enough to make a noticeable difference. He included a single veiled note, remember the importance of clear documentation. Within hours, whispers began to circulate. Colleagues who had been drowning in Greg's ever-shifting priorities started to find their workflow miraculously smoother. Tasks that used to take hours were now completed in minutes. The automatic reports Greg had demanded, often with vague specifications, began to arrive with startling accuracy and efficiency. A subtle sense of relief, mixed with confusion, began to spread through the department. Greg, however, remained oblivious. He saw the sudden surge in productivity as a testament to his own masterful leadership. See? He'd boast in team meetings, gesturing wildly with his tablet. This is what happens when you synergize, when you leverage core competencies. This is the Sterling Corp of the future. He attributed the improvements to his own agile leadership, completely unaware that the engine driving it was the very man he had so casually dismissed. Then came the first tremor. A critical client, Omnicorp, a long-standing partner that accounted for a significant chunk of the department's revenue, sent a terse email regarding a delayed project deliverable. The deadline had passed without so much as a notice of delay. Panic, a rare commodity in Leo's former department, began to surface. Greg scrambled, calling emergency meetings, demanding answers. But the usual excuses, the blame placed on unforeseen technical challenges or resource allocation issues, fell flat. The automated scripts, working flawlessly, were churning out data that showed no such issues on Leo's end. Leo, from his quiet apartment, watched the digital tremors through the occasional discreet check of Sterling Corp's public-facing system performance metrics. He saw the slight dip in response times, the subtle increase in server load, the small but significant indicators that something was indeed amiss. He also received a discreet message from Sarah, a senior developer on his old team, who had been one of the recipients of his workflow optimization notes. Leo, you won't believe this. Sarah's text read, Omnicorp is furious. Greg is losing his mind. He's blaming the system, but it's working perfectly for us now. It's like magic. But this delay, it's weird. Something's not right. The integration point for their API seems to be offline. Leo's lips curved into a small, grim smile. He knew exactly why Omnicorp's integration point was offline. During his tenure, he had implemented a series of automated security protocols designed to flag and isolate any system anomalies or suspicious activity. One such protocol, triggered by an unusual surge in outbound data requests from an unrecognized IP address, an IP address that coincidentally matched a temporary VPN server Leo had briefly used to access certain Sterling Corp resources from his apartment, was designed to temporarily suspend access to external integrations as a precautionary measure. He hadn't intended for it to trigger so soon, but Greg's desperate attempts to retrace Leo's contributions, his frantic digging through old project files, had inadvertently set off the alarm. He decided it was time for the next domino. With a few keystrokes, he accessed a dormant but fully functional automated system he had built years ago, a sophisticated fail-safe designed to flag and report any significant deviation from operational best practices. It was a tool intended for internal auditing, a sort of digital whistleblower. Now, it was his. He programmed it to send a detailed report to a specific list of recipients: the Sterling Corp Board of Directors, the Chief Financial Officer, and, crucially, the lead counsel for Omnicorp, a notoriously aggressive litigator named Miss Evelyn Reed. The report, generated with objective, irrefutable data, highlighted a series of critical system vulnerabilities that had been present for months. It detailed instances of unauthorized data access, inconsistent security patching schedules, and, most damningly, a complete lack of proper documentation for a significant portion of the company's core intellectual property. It didn't mention Leo by name, but it painted a stark picture of incompetence and neglect, directly implicating Greg's management style and the HR department's failure to oversee. The ripple effect was immediate and devastating. Omnicorp's legal team, armed with the detailed report, launched an immediate internal investigation. The board, already unnerved by the missed deadline and the growing whispers of internal disarray, demanded answers. Greg found himself blindsided, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling around him. His frantic attempts to explain away the report were met with stony silence. Brenda from HR, usually so quick to issue platitudes and dismiss concerns, was now the subject of intense scrutiny. Leo watched the digital storm brew from his quiet apartment. He saw the frantic internal emails circulating, the hushed conversations in the office hallways amplified through Sarah's discreet updates. The panic was palpable. They knew something was deeply wrong. They knew it was systemic. And they suspected, with a dawning horror, that the problem wasn't a lack of resources, but a lack of competent leadership, a lack of the very thing they had so carelessly discarded. The company was on the brink, facing not just a missed deadline and a disgruntled client, but a full-blown operational crisis and a potential regulatory nightmare. They had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went, or that the architect of their impending downfall was a man they had deemed redundant. The frantic calls began on a Tuesday morning, precisely at 8:03 a.m., a time Leo had chosen deliberately. It was the hour Greg had summoned him for his termination meeting, a small, calculated echo of the insult. The first call came from Sterling Corp's chief legal officer, a man named David Chen, whose voice was strained and laced with an unfamiliar desperation. "Harper, is that you?" Chen asked, his voice a strained whisper. He'd obviously used a burner or a masked number, but Leo recognized the slightly nasal cadence. We need to talk." Leo, stirring his morning coffee, replied calmly, "Leo, my name is Leo, and yes, Mr. Chen, I believe we do have a few things to discuss." He didn't use his personal phone, of course. He was using a secure VoIP line, routed through multiple servers, untraceable. Chen stammered, The system failure, the Omnicorp issue. We've been advised by Omnicorp's counsel that there are significant issues with the infrastructure. Issues that appear to stem from unattended vulnerabilities." He paused, his voice dropping further. The report, it detailed a shocking lack of oversight and a complete absence of proper documentation for critical IP. "Indeed," Leo responded, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "As I meticulously documented, and as my exit ensured was properly flagged by an automated audit, Sterling Corp's foundational systems were neglected, especially following a period of significant leadership transition." He let the implication hang in the air. Next came a call from Sarah, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and frantic urgency. "Leo, Greg is losing it. The board is breathing down his neck. They're threatening to pull funding. Omnicorp's lawyers are talking about major damages. They think you did this. Leo chuckled, a low, dry sound. They're not entirely wrong, Sarah, but they're thinking about it in the wrong way. This isn't a sabotage, it's a reevaluation. The call he'd been waiting for came an hour later. It was Mark Sterling himself, the stoic CEO, a man Leo had only ever seen on the company's internal newsletter, always looking impeccably composed. Sterling's voice was cold, but beneath the surface, Leo detected a tremor of genuine fear. Leo, Sterling began, his tone clipped. We understand you've been terminated, and we understand that your departure has coincided with significant operational disruptions. We need you to help us resolve this, immediately. Leo leaned back in his chair, the familiar comfort of his apartment, a stark contrast to the chaos he was now orchestrating. Mr. Sterling, help is a relative term. What exactly are you offering? Sterling paused, the silence stretching. Reinstatement, a significant salary increase, full control over IT infrastructure and development, a consultant role with ironclad contractual protections. Whatever it takes to get the systems back online and Omnicorp appeased. He was throwing everything he had at the wall. And Greg? Leo asked, his voice deliberately neutral. Sterling hesitated. Greg will be reassigned. His position will be made redundant. The word, so casually used against Leo, now seemed to carry the weight of a death sentence. And Brenda from HR? Leo pressed a small smile playing on his lips. A sigh from Sterling. Brenda will also be reassigned. Her performance has been unsatisfactory. Leo set down his coffee cup. This was the end game. He laid out the traps, presented the evidence, and now the panicked mice were scurrying into his carefully constructed cage. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the offer. However, my terms are slightly different. You see, it's not just about fixing your current predicament. It's about ensuring such a predicament never arises again. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. My first option, the narrow escape hatch as you might call it, is this. I return as a highly compensated consultant with absolute autonomy over the IT and development departments. Greg and Brenda are immediately terminated without severance, their departures to be publicly framed as a necessary restructuring to address ongoing compliance and operational failures. Omnicorp receives a formal apology, a substantial service credit for the disruption, and a guarantee of future stability. My contract includes a clause that any future dismissal without documented cause will trigger a substantial severance payout equivalent to 3 years' salary and forfeiture of all company IP I've developed, which, as you know, is substantial. Sterling was silent for a moment, absorbing the implications. And your second option? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. My second option, Leo continued, his voice steady, is the nuclear one. I release the full audit report, compiled with irrefutable evidence from Sterling Corp's own internal systems, to Omnicorp's legal team, to the relevant regulatory bodies, and to the press. This report details not just the current system failures, but a pattern of gross negligence, data mismanagement, and a concerning lack of transparency that predates Greg's tenure. It will trigger investigations, potential fines, and a catastrophic blow to Sterling Corp's reputation, likely leading to a complete loss of investor confidence and potential acquisition by a competitor at a fraction of its current value. Furthermore, the IP ownership clause in my original contract, which I believe has been inadvertently violated, will be vigorously pursued. This means Sterling Corp will cease to possess the rights to its core AI platform, its proprietary algorithms, and years of development, all of which will revert to me. The silence on Sterling's end was heavy, pregnant with the understanding of the abyss he was staring into. Leo could almost hear the frantic whispers of the board meeting happening in the background. Finally, Sterling spoke, his voice devoid of its earlier authority, replaced by a tone of profound weariness and resignation. We accept your first option, Leo. All of it. The resolution was swift and brutal. Greg was escorted from the building that same day, his parting gift a terse email from HR confirming his immediate termination for cause, citing gross incompetence and failure to manage departmental operations. Brenda followed soon after, her exit quietly attributed to strategic departmental realignment. Omnicorp received a fulsome apology and a service credit that Leo had generously calculated as a small fraction of the potential damages they could have claimed. Leo's new contract was ironclad, stipulating his role, his compensation, and his absolute authority. His scripts, the silent engines of his revenge, were now the official backbone of Sterling Corp's IT infrastructure, their efficiency and reliability a constant, quiet reminder of the man they had tried to discard. Leo returned to Sterling Corp not as a humble employee seeking a second chance, but as a powerful consultant, the architect of their survival. He walked through the familiar halls, not with a sense of vindication, but with a quiet sense of order restored. Greg's motivational posters were gone, replaced by functional system status dashboards. The air in the office felt cleaner, less charged with fear, and more with quiet competence. His team, now genuinely led, thrived. Productivity soared, client satisfaction rebounded, and the company, battered but not broken, began to rebuild. As for Greg, his swift ouster was followed by a quiet but devastating online trail. Rumors, fueled by anonymous tips that Leo subtly facilitated, painted a picture of a man who had single-handedly derailed a promising company through sheer ego and incompetence. His LinkedIn profile, once a monument to self-promotion, became a digital graveyard of his failed ambition. Brenda, too, found her career prospects dimmed, her HR reputation tarnished by the quiet, irrefutable evidence of her complicity. Leo, from his newly acquired corner office, one with a view and, crucially, a locked door, found a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge for its own sake, but about the restoration of balance, the triumph of competence over hubris, of meticulous planning over reckless ambition. He had taken a company that tried to erase him and made them dependent on him, transforming their mistake into his ultimate power play. And so, the story of Leo's corporate takedown became a legend whispered in cubicles and boardrooms alike. A cautionary tale about the unseen value of quiet competence and the devastating consequences of underestimating the people who truly hold the system together. If watching corporate hubris meet its match and a quiet individual orchestrate a perfectly executed endgame strikes a chord with you, then consider liking this video and subscribing for more tales of satisfying comeuppances and the intricate dance of corporate justice. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud, it's just absolute